Part 3. The Collector's Gambit.
The hands were wrong. They weren't flesh and bone. They were sculpted from the packed dirt and clay of the cellar walls, glistening with a damp, black sheen. They moved with a jerky, unnatural life, fingers of hardened earth scrabbling for purchase, trying to pull their unseen forms out of the walls. Ava reacted instantly, her police training overriding the sheer impossibility of the sight. She leveled her pistol at the nearest emerging form and fired. The shot was deafening in the small space, the muzzle flash a brilliant, blinding strobe. The bullet struck the earthen hand dead center, blasting a chunk of dirt and stone from its back. The hand shuddered, paused for a second, and then continued its relentless advance, seemingly uninjured.
Don't waste your ammo.
Elias shouted, his mind racing, flipping through a mental index of the journal's contents. They're not alive to be killed. Julian Croft watched them, a look of detached amusement on his face. A commendable, if primitive, response, Sergeant. But you cannot shoot the earth. Two more hands erupted from the wall near Ava, their fingers grasping for her arm. She recoiled, stumbling back, nearly tripping over the discarded decoy journal.
The circle on the floor.
Elias remembered the surge of cold, clean power when the blood had sealed the ritual. It was a holy space.
A sanctuary.
Ava, the circle, he yelled.
Get into the circle.
He grabbed her arm and pulled her back with him. They shuffled into the center of the ring of sigils, their backs pressed against each other. As the earthen hands reached the edge of the carved lines, they recoiled as if from an electric fence, their dirt fingers smoking and crumbling where they made contact with the invisible barrier. It worked. They were safe, for now. Trapped in a 9-foot circle of consecrated ground, but safe. Croft let out a sigh of disappointment. Clever. You're standing on the one piece of ground in this entire valley that I cannot directly touch. The binding is robust. You've done your homework. But it raises a rather tedious logistical problem. He paced the small area outside the circle, his expensive shoes leaving no prints in the loose dirt. The GWYLL is locked in tight. And the key, he nodded at Ava, is standing in a place I cannot get to. This changes my approach from a simple acquisition to a forced demolition. It will be messier, louder, and it will attract attention.
Il déteste attention.
Elias's mind was a whirlwind. They had a shield, but they were still in a cage, and the zookeeper was a sociopathic wizard. They couldn't stay here forever. They needed to get out of the cellar. The journal, Elias whispered to Ava, his back still pressed against hers. Does it say anything about unmaking the ritual? Are you insane? She hissed back. We just finished it.
Not unmaking it. Releasing the energy. The catalyst absorbed the power of the seal.
What if we can discharge it?
Like a flashbang.
His eyes scanned the frantic scrawls in the grimoire, his flashlight beam shaking. Most of it was about containment, binding, sealing. But in the margins of one page, Reese Price had scrawled a note, a desperate thought experiment. Ospide sail and tori. Haidi regni vindiriula. If the seal breaks, the energy must go somewhere. Beneath it was a single hastily drawn sigil, a circle with an arrow pointing outwards.
A symbol of release.
It was an incredible risk. It could shatter the binding completely. Or it could do nothing at all. I have an idea, Elias said, his voice low and urgent. It's crazy.
When he give a signal, get ready to run.
He looked up at Croft, who had stopped pacing and was watching them with an expression of mild curiosity. You're right, mister. Croft, Elias said, his voice surprisingly steady. This is a tedious problem. So let's solve it. He knelt down, his hand hovering over the blood-stained piece of coal. He took a deep breath.
You want the catalyst.
Elias shouted. Have it. He slammed his palm down onto the release sigil in the book. Then he grabbed the lump of coal and hurled it, not at Croft, but at the stone wall directly behind him. The moment the coal left the consecrated ground of the circle, it unleashed the energy it held. It didn't explode. It imploded. A wave of absolute sensory chaos erupted from it. A flash of blinding, colorless light and a concussive wave of soundless pressure filled the cellar. It was the physical manifestation of the GWL's rage, a raw blast of primordial power. Croft cried out, a genuine sound of pain and surprise, stumbling back as the wave of force hit him. The earthen hands, their connection to their master momentarily severed, crumbled into dust and fell to the floor.
Now! Elias screamed.
He and Ava didn't hesitate. They burst from the circle, scrambling over the rubble of the fallen hands. They half climbed, half fell out of the cellar entrance, gasping in the cold night air. The world outside the cellar felt blessedly real, blessedly normal. Behind them, from the dark opening, Croft's voice rose in a furious snarl, no longer calm or cultured. It was the sound of a collector whose priceless acquisition had just been smashed. They ran. They fled into the warped, steam-vented woods of Centralia, the furious shouts of Julian Croft fading behind them. They had escaped the cellar, but they both knew they hadn't escaped him. They had only managed to truly make him angry. The flight through the woods was a nightmare of burning lungs and stumbling feet. The terrain of Centralia was a living trap. The ground, heated from below by the eternal fire, could give way at any moment, plunging them into a sinkhole of hot ash and suffocating gas. Plumes of steam erupted from the ground without warning, smelling of brimstone and decay. "Where are we going?" Ava gasped, her side cramping, her police training the only thing keeping her upright and moving.
"Away!" Elias panted.
"The Bronco is useless. He'll be looking for it. We have to get off the grid." A guttural roar echoed through the trees behind them, closer than they expected. It wasn't Croft's voice. It was deeper, more bestial. "That's his man," Ava said, her face grim.
"The facilitator."
They pushed harder, adrenaline masking their exhaustion. They burst out of the woods onto a derelict street of crumbling foundations. The moon, a cold, silver disk, offered a treacherous light. "This way," Ava said, taking the lead.
"You know these streets."
"There's an old service tunnel for the mines about a half-mile from here. If we can make it, it'll take us out beyond the exclusion zone." It was their only chance. They ran down the center of the broken street, their footsteps echoing in the dead quiet. A shape, huge and hulking, appeared at the far end of the street, blocking their path. It was the facilitator, the man from the cellar. He was limping heavily, his leg clearly still injured, but he held the crowbar in his hand like it was an extension of his arm. They were caught between him and whatever was chasing them through the woods. "Split up!" Ava yelled, shoving Elias toward the skeletal remains of a collapsed house. "Draw his fire." She took cover behind a rusted-out husk of a car, her pistol drawn. The big man charged, his limp making his gait a terrifying, lurching rhythm. He ignored Elias, his eyes fixed on Ava. He clearly held a grudge. "You broke my knee, bitch," he bellowed, his voice thick with pain and rage. Elias, hidden in the shadows of the foundation, fumbled in his laptop bag.
"The journal."
He ripped it out, frantically searching for anything that could help.
"Award, accurs, anything."
His eyes fell on a small diagram in the margin, a sigil labeled RHWASTR, the Welsh word for obstacle or barrier. It was simple, a series of crossed lines. It was meant to deter spirits, not flesh and blood thugs. But he was desperate. As the facilitator raised his crowbar to bring it down on Ava's position, Elias found a large, flat piece of slate. Using a smaller, sharp rock, he quickly scratched the RHWASTR sigil onto its surface. "Hey!" he yelled. The man turned, his face a mask of fury. Elias held up the slate.
"You serve a man who play with magic."
"Let's see how you like it." He threw the slate. It spun through the air and shattered on the ground right at the facilitator's feet. For a second, nothing happened.
The man looked, a cruel, ugly sound. Stupid trick.
Then, the ground beneath his feet began to hiss. The steam vents that dotted the landscape seemed to coalesce around him. A huge plume of hot, sulfurous steam erupted from the ground where the slate had shattered, enveloping him completely. He screamed, a high, piercing sound of agony as the superheated vapor scalded him. He stumbled back blindly, dropping the crowbar, swatting at the air as if fighting off invisible hornets. "Come on!" Ava shouted. They didn't wait to see what happened. They ran, leaving the screaming man in his personal pocket of hell. They found the service tunnel entrance hidden behind a curtain of overgrown ivy, a round, brick-lined opening leading into utter blackness. Without a word, they plunged inside. The tunnel was claustrophobic and smelled of damp earth and rust. They moved as fast as they could, their hands trailing along the cold, curved walls. After what felt like an eternity, they saw a faint circle of gray light ahead. They emerged, gasping, into a ditch on the side of a quiet county road, miles from the center of Centralia. They were out. They collapsed on the grass, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and relief. "He's not just a man," Elias said, staring back in the direction of the town.
Croft.
The hands. He has his own power. The GWILL. It was just a prize he wanted to add to his collection.
What do we do now?
Ava asked, her voice raw.
We can't go to police. We can't go home.
We have a magic book, a piece of coal that detonates, and a wizard trying to kill us. This is so far past procedure, I don't even know where to start. Elias thought for a moment, his mind reaching back, past the podcast, past his disgrace, to his university days. To the one man who had encouraged his wild theories. The one man who understood that history and myth were two sides of the same coin. The man who had been cast out long before him. "There's one person," Elias said slowly.
Mayol mentor.
"He'll think I'm insane. He might not even talk to me. But he's the only one on Earth who might know what we're up against." He pulled out his phone. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. He found the number, one he hadn't dialed in almost a decade.
Who are you calling?
Ava asked. "Dr. Alistair Finch," Elias replied. "And I'm praying he picks up." The phone rang 4 times, each one stretching Elias's nerves to the breaking point. He expected it to go to voicemail. He expected the number to be disconnected. He did not expect the gruff, impatient voice that finally answered. "What?"
Dr. Finch.
Elias said, his own voice sounding thin and reedy.
"It's Elias Thorne."
There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. Elias could hear the faint sound of pages turning. "Thorne," Finch's voice was dry as dust.
"To what do you the displeasure?"
"Have you called to tell me about the lizard people running the Federal Reserve, or are you finally ready to apologize for setting back the field of serious historical inquiry by a decade?" The old bitterness was still there, sharp as ever. "Neither," Elias said, his desperation making him bold.
"I need your help. I'm in trouble. Real trouble. You're always in trouble, my boy."
"It's your defining characteristic. You have a talent for kicking over rocks that should be left alone." "One of them kicked back," Elias said, his voice dropping. "I have the price grimoire." The turning of pages stopped. The silence that followed was different. It was the silence of pure, focused attention. "That's not possible," Finch said, his voice a low whisper. "It was lost for a century." "Well, it's found," Elias said. "And there's someone else who wants it. Someone who knows what it is."
Un man nommé Julian Croft. Eliaseur da Charpentac of Brice. Where are you, Thorne?
The question was no longer mocking. It was an urgent command.
Outside Centralia.
We had a confrontation. Is the binding intact? We reinforced it, Elias said. But Croft is still here. He wants the locus and the bloodline. He glanced at Ava, who was watching him with a mixture of suspicion and exhaustion.
Get out of there.
Now, Finch ordered. Do not use your credit cards.
Donateur non your GPS. Drive west.
I'm sending you an address. It's a B&B in the Alleghenies. Pay cash. Ask for Mr. Glass.
Ouais for my instruction.
And Thorne. Yes. Don't talk to anyone else. You have no idea what you've stepped in. The line went dead. A moment later, a text message arrived with an address and a single sentence. Burn this message. Ava looked at him, raising an eyebrow. Mr. Glass? Are we in a spy movie now? Close enough, Elias said, showing her the address before deleting it. He's helping us. For now. They walked for 2 miles under the moonlight until they reached a sleepy all-night gas station. The attendant, a teenager listening to music on his earbuds, barely glanced at them as Ava used the last of her cash to pay for a taxi. They told the driver they'd been camping and their car had broken down, a story flimsy enough to be believable. The taxi dropped them at the edge of a small town where they found a used car lot with a rusty 20-year-old pickup truck for sale. Elias paid for it with the emergency cash he kept stashed in his laptop bag, the transaction feeling deeply illicit. As they drove west, away from Centralia and into the rolling Black Hills of Pennsylvania, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. Ava stared out the window, the passing trees like smudges of ink against the dark sky. So who is he? She finally asked. This Dr. Finch. He was my doctoral advisor at Penn, Elias explained, his eyes fixed on the empty road. A genius. A historian who treated folklore and mythology like primary source documents. He believed that some legends, some rituals, were echoes of real events, real technologies. Just of a kind we no longer recognize. Sounds like you, she murmured. I learned it all from him, Elias admitted. But he went too far. He published a paper trying to prove that the oracle at Delphi wasn't just a woman high on volcanic fumes. He claimed it was a conscious, non-human entity, and that the temple was a machine designed to communicate with it. He provided evidence. Geological surveys, astronomical charts, translations of esoteric texts. The university laughed him out of his career. They called him a lunatic. And you followed in his footsteps. I tried, Elias said with a grimace. But I wasn't as smart as him. I just got loud. Finch, he went quiet. Disappeared from public life completely. I haven't spoken to him in years. They drove on in silence, the only sound the rattling of the old truck's engine. Elias turned on the radio, scanning the AM band for news. He found a local station. Officials are still baffled by the series of intense, localized seismic tremors reported in the Centralia area overnight, the newscaster's voice crackled. Geologists are calling the activity highly unusual, as the ground composition should not be capable of producing such effects. In addition, state police have cordoned off the old St. Ignatius Church after the structure unexpectedly collapsed in on itself around 10 p.m. No injuries were reported. Elias and Ava looked at each other, a cold dread passing between them. The church. That was Croft's chosen meeting place. He had been there, waiting. The seismic tremors. The binding ritual.
Croft's rage. The démolition et des promises ad beguin.
Their fight in the cellar wasn't contained. It was spilling out, shaking the very foundations of the poisoned earth. The GWYLL was still in its cage, but Julian Croft was now rattling the bars for the whole world to feel. The bed and breakfast was a sprawling Victorian manor nestled in a secluded valley deep in the Allegheny Mountains. It was called the Quiet Mews, and it lived up to its name. The place felt insulated from the rest of the world, wrapped in a thick blanket of silence and mist. A small, bald man with thick spectacles and a perpetually worried expression greeted them at the door. Mr. Glass, he squeaked when Elias gave the code name. Yes, yes, of course. We've been expecting you. Dr. Finch arranged everything. Please come in, come in. He led them not to a guest room, but through the back of the house and into a large climate-controlled library that smelled of old books and beeswax. The room was a fortress of knowledge, the walls lined floor to ceiling with thousands of volumes on history, archaeology, theology, and subjects Elias couldn't even identify. In the center of the room, seated in a high-backed leather armchair with a tartan blanket over his lap, was Dr.
Alistair Finch.
He looked older than Elias remembered, and frilier. His hair was completely white, his skin thin as parchment. But his eyes, behind the thick lenses of his reading glasses, were as sharp and intelligent as ever. They missed nothing. Thorn, Finch said, his voice a low rumble. He gestured to the woman standing beside his chair, a tall, severe-looking woman with her hair in a tight bun.
This is MS. Albright, my associate.
She will ensure we are not disturbed. He looked past Elias to Ava.
And you must be the Kowalski. The linchpin.
Remarkable. I've read about your family's unique predicament. To meet a living part of it is quite something. Ava shifted uncomfortably, not used to being referred to as a predicament. You know about my family? My dear girl, I have made it my life's work to know about all the little pockets of unpleasantness that fester in the dark corners of history, Finch said. He gestured to 2 chairs.
Sit.
And show me the book. Elias carefully took the journal from his bag and placed it on the large oak table in front of Finch. The old historian leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. He didn't touch it, not at first. He simply looked at it, his gaze intense, as if he were reading the history of every hand that had ever held it. Remarkable, he breathed. The authentic article. He then looked at the oilcloth bundle Elias placed beside it. And that, I presume, is the locus minor?
The Encore Stone.
We called it the catalyst, Elias said. Apt, Finch nodded. He finally reached out a thin, trembling hand and placed it on the cover of the journal. He closed his eyes.
The binding is strong.
Volatile, but strong. Your blood has complicated the formula, Sergeant. Made it organic.
A living lock.
He opened his eyes and leaned back, his energy seeming to drain away. Now,
Tell me everything.
Start from when you received the book.
Omi nothing.
For the next hour, Elias and Ava recounted their story.
The sigil on the rod, the voice, the attack in the cellar, the de quoi, the ritual, the heurtenant, Julian Croft.
Finch listened without interruption, his steepled fingers pressed to his lips. When they finished, a heavy silence filled the library. Julian Croft, Finch finally said, the name tasting like poison in his mouth. I feared he would be involved. You know him? Elias asked. I know of him, Finch corrected. He is not merely a collector, Thorn. He is the preeminent figure in a particularly vile organization known as the Ethelred Society. They are not academics. They are not explorers. They are harvesters. They believe that supernatural entities, spirits, deities, are nothing more than naturally occurring sources of energy, like oil or uranium, and they believe it is their right to exploit them. The explanation sent a chill down Elias's spine. It was a cold, corporate, uniquely modern kind of evil. The GWYLL, Finch continued, is a particularly rich prize. A Class 4 telluric entity.
Arrow, primal being of earth and fire.
It has no higher consciousness, no sense of morality. It is pure, elemental power. To a man like Croft, it is the ultimate untapped resource. He doesn't want to bargain with it. He wants to crack it open like a geode and consume the power within, adding it to his own considerable abilities.
So the in the cellar.
Ava began. Were his, Finch confirmed. Croft is a master of thaumaturgic puppetry.
et animate base matériale, earth, clay, stone.
A parlor trick for a man of his caliber, but effective against the uninitiated. He was testing you. Finch leaned forward, his expression grave. Reinforcing the binding bought you time, but it also painted a target on your back, Sergeant. Before, Croft could have worked to unravel the old ritual. It would have been difficult, but possible. Now, with your blood woven into the very fabric of the seal, the binding is tied to your life force. He cannot break it without you. So he wants to kill me? Ava said, her voice flat. Oh no, Finch said, a grim look in his eyes. Killing you would be inefficient. It might sever the connection and cause the binding to snap back, stronger than before. No, he won't kill you. He will take you. He will drain you. He will use your own life, your own blood, to slowly and carefully dismantle the prison you've built, siphoning the G-Donal's power for himself as it bleeds out. It is a process that would be unimaginably painful. And by the end, there would be nothing left of you to kill. The room was silent save for the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. The horror of Finch's words was absolute. Ava was no longer just a key. She was the fuel for the G-Donal's destruction, and her own. What do we do? Elias asked, his voice barely a whisper. How do we fight him? Finch looked from Elias to Ava, then to the journal on the table. A long, weary sigh escaped his lips. You cannot play defense against a man like Croft. You cannot hide. He will find you, the old doctor said. Fortifying the cage was Act 1. Now for Act 2, you must do the one thing he will never expect. He tapped a bony finger on the journal.
You must open the cage.
You must go back to Centralia, and you must perform a new ritual. Not one of binding, or of sealing. You are going to perform a ritual of awakening. You are going to wake the GWYLL up, and you are going to bind it. Not to the earth, but to one of you.